This is the clicker. It's the third stage of the infected evolution in The Last of Us. I wasn't aware of The Last of Us before the HBO show came out, but as soon as I heard the sound the clicker makes, I became obsessed. It's a sound that genuinely scares me, and it's stuck with me in a way that hasn't happened since I was a kid. As an adult who loves horror, it was fun to run into a sound and a creature that really wiggled its way into my brain. I am so obsessed, in fact, that I have decided to make my own. A few notes before we get started. Number one, I'll be sculpting a bust, which is a first for me. I'm going to try and print it as close to life size as I can manage on my 3D printer, but the most important thing for me is that it must make sound. I want to use this project to give myself a little confidence boost in my sculpting skills. I'm a 2D artist still learning 3D modeling and sculpting, so this video is not a tutorial, it's an experiment. My theory is that practicing on a subject that's very organic and relatively forgiving as far as shape goes is going to give me that boost. I'm also going to investigate that sound more because I want to be able to answer, why do I love it so much? All my projects start with research and a reference sheet, and yes, before you ask, rewatching the series and various playthroughs of the games definitely counts as research. Luckily for us, there is a ton of material out there on the making of this creature, including 2 art books from the games and an abundance of interviews with the creators, both from the original game design and the reinterpretation for the show. In one of those interviews, they describe creating the psychological scape versus the soundscape. Because The Last of Us isn't a standard zombie story, they focused on sounds that were more emotional, more character-driven, and even more utilitarian. For example, the clickers are blinded by the fungus that bursts through their skulls after they've been infected, so that sound they're making is used for echolocation.
We're really playing with this idea, kind of in that Hitchcockian way. Like, it's more about the psychology of what's happening on the audioscape more than what you're seeing. It's like, again, less is more.
Was probably going to be the toughest was the clicker. And we came up with the idea that they were going to be blind through the artwork that ended up happening and that they were going to use echolocation.
Here's this benign clicking sound that on its own isn't very creepy, but put in this other context, all of a sudden you hear this sound and it has this different symbolism in the game and it becomes this fear factor. And again, using audio, you don't know where this is and you hear this clicking sound, it's echoing down the hallway and people get very scared when they hear this audio cue.
The clicker sound was designed to be this horrifying audio cue that triggers your fight or flight response. It's the kind of sound that tells you something really bad is coming, even if you can't see it yet. Now that we have a reference sheet, I'm starting out with a really basic head mesh in Blender. I'll use this to pick the general pose before moving to the iPad and using Forger for the bulk of this project. This is all a process of trial and error, working and reworking until it looks close to something I like. Watching those interviews got me thinking about the first time I was really scared by a sound. When I was 11, I was absolutely terrified of M. Night Shyamalan's Signs. Back then, I was the scaredy cat of my friend group. My love for all things spooky did not start until later in life, and I definitely got teased for how afraid I was of this movie. No spoilers if you haven't seen it, but the basic plot is that aliens come to Earth, terrorize a really sad family, and Joaquin Phoenix makes this face for like half the movie. I saw this in the theater, sitting between my best friend and my mom, safely hidden behind my own shirt so I didn't accidentally see the alien. But looking back now, it wasn't really the alien I was afraid of. It was this sound. It's that terrible sound the baby monitor makes when the aliens are getting closer. Now, I have seen this movie as an adult, and like I said, no spoilers, but it's not that scary of a movie. The aliens have a certain weakness that really undermines them as a threat, but as a kid, that didn't matter even a little bit. I had nightmares for weeks, and worse, I kept turning off my little sister's baby monitor, much to my parents' frustration. Baby monitors are much fancier now, but they used to basically be walkie-talkies, and they picked up random static all the time. So this was my first encounter with a horror movie sound in my everyday life, and it terrified me. Richard King was the supervising sound editor on Signs. If that name sounds familiar, it's probably because he has won 4 Oscars and was recently the sound designer on Oppenheimer.
My approach is always to put myself in the character's shoes. I want to put myself in the world the characters are inhabiting. The composer composes sounds that the audience hears, and the sound designer composes and collects and assembles sounds that the characters hear. So you're creating the character's world around them. For me, it's really all about climbing into the characters' skins and vicariously living through their world, and that's the fun of it.
The model is looking pretty good. I'm taking it back into Blender to cut it into multiple parts before slicing it in Cura and sending it off to the 3D printer. Altogether, it was about a full week of actual printing time, but closer to 3 weeks total with failures, changes, and full-blown breakdowns, both mine and the printers. I cut out a large chunk of the base, and that's where we're going to hide the electronics. That's this little push-button speaker. I love the song it came preloaded with, but we are going to swap that out for some clicker sounds later. The printed parts are looking great in my opinion. I can see a lot of the details, but there are some issues here and there. I'll be spending a couple of days sanding the individual pieces before I can assemble them. They'll also get a coat of filler primer before a second round of sanding. While I was exploring this topic, I came across the Thomas Flight video, How Nope Tricks Your Ears. In addition to being an excellent breakdown of why the sound design in Nope works so well, he also talks about this scene from Jaws.
One of Jaws' most tense scenes is early on. We know there's been a shark attack, but the beaches haven't been closed. So Chief Brody sits on the beach, watching and waiting. And crucially, so does the audience. There's a lot that Spielberg is doing here to build suspense and anticipation.
I love the movie Jaws, and it's for two specific reasons. Number one, this line.
Here's to swimming with bow-legged women.
And number two, the first time I watched this movie, I was a little kid. I watched it with my dad at home in our living room, most likely on VHS, and it was terrifying. Maybe halfway through the movie, during a particularly tense scene, my dad notices how scared I am, and he hits the mute button. And after a few seconds, I can sort of feel the little gears clicking into place. Without sound, it's not scary. It's not scary when the music isn't telling you what to be afraid of. And in that, there's a delicate balance that every piece of media has to navigate. How do you make an audience feel a specific emotion without giving the whole game away, without cheapening the scare? A good film, like Jaws, uses sound as a weapon, and I think the clicker does that too. Okay, so over a month has passed since that last sanding footage you saw, and in that time I got really busy and I had to move. I didn't take enough care when packing these up for the move, assuming I would just get right back into it, but sadly these have spent quite a lot of time in a really hot garage over the last few weeks. That unfortunately means that those issues I saw earlier are quite a bit worse than expected. There was a brief minute where I considered reprinting the whole thing, but ultimately decided just to take the extra couple days to clean it up. So I filled in those smaller gaps with wood filler and gave it a light sanding before assembling all the parts and getting to work on the seams. For the larger gaps, I used thin sheets of plastic to give it all a little structure before adding the wood filler on top. Then I'll sand back those seams before giving it a final coat of primer. Overall, I'm really happy with how this final assembly came together. It's far from perfect, and I've lost more detail than I was hoping for, but I think once I get some color on there, that shouldn't matter too much. Now we're on to the airbrushing, starting with a base dead flesh color, and then adding in a little bit of pink and some larger areas of dark red. It is a little scary applying so much vibrant color, but I'm going to trust in the process and know that I will be layering on a bunch more effects and gross washes, and eventually it will come together. Next, some light blue veins. And then we move on to the fungus, starting with the lighter parts before topping them off with some yellows and oranges. And then it's onto the mouth, working in different reds to get gnarly looking variations. Followed by a few sprays of oranges and reds, and after that I get to play dentist and give this guy his upper teeth back. And UV resin to make it look all nice and goopy. Before we get into the last few steps, I want to select that clicker sound that will play when someone pushes this button. And there are a variety available. That variety is one of the many things that helps to ground a creature like a clicker. They have a sound for when they are unaware, when they become aware, when they're hunting, and when they're attacking. It's practical, and I think it makes the clicker a little more real. To hide the speaker button, I'm going to tear up an old shirt and grunge it with a little bit of black and brown paint. And then after blacking out the sides of the bust and some final adjustments and a little bit of gluing, I am calling this one done. I am very happy with how this turned out. This project took way longer than I was expecting it to, but that's okay. I think it was absolutely worth it. Yes, I can see the defects and the seam lines and the filler, but that's because I spent weeks making those mistakes. And nobody who has seen this in real life has noticed. They're all just as excited as I am by the sound. I'm mostly happy that this project gave me the chance to explore a topic that I knew I liked, but hadn't known a whole lot about before. I'm satisfied that I have a deeper appreciation for the art of sound design, and it was a super fun rabbit hole to go down. I feel like I've answered my question. I'm obsessed with the clicker click because it's a fantastic, spine-chilling example of the concept that Alfred Hitchcock put so simply. There is no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it. And that applies to sharks, aliens, zombies of all varieties, and the monsters under your bed. I think this project showed me some specific areas where I need improvement, like topology and having a defined workflow when it comes to 3D sculpting. Speaking of workflow, I'm thinking of trying out a resin printer next, and from what I've seen, it could save me a lot of post-processing time. If you have any thoughts or experience on that, I'd love to hear about it. And I hope you enjoyed watching this project come together. If you're interested in learning more, I will link my reference sheet and a bunch of other resources below. Also, the STL file is available, but I will warn you now that it is not optimized in literally any way, especially for 3D printing. So print at your own risk, and links are in the description.